Just before I start, I'd like to say that listening to the previous speaker, I think you're going to hear me repeat very much of what she's already said. I don't think I have the skills to kind of edit out what may be duplicated, so if you'll bear with me. But for me, it's quite reassuring to think that we're on the same page, if you like. If at any time you can't hear me, will you just let me know and I will speak up a little bit louder. I've been asked to talk today about my experiences as a carer. Well, as the daughter of a mom with dementia, I don't ever remember thinking of myself as a carer. I was quite simply my mum's daughter, and she was my mum. The word carer implied to me that I was providing care with understanding, knowledge and expertise, which was appropriate, acceptable and of the highest quality. I certainly struggled with that concept of myself. It suggested to me also that others had expectations of me which I felt I couldn't really meet. What I'm about to say, I guess, is directed mostly at carers of people with dementia and the people that they care for and about. But I'd just like to say to any professional carers here that a lot of carers are a little bit like I used to be, I guess. Initially, I couldn't believe or understand why and how you could possibly help us. I think I'd convinced myself early on that for many reasons we could and should, as a family, go it alone. I discovered eventually that I really did have to ask for professional help. I had to steel myself to do that. But now to our story and our experiences as a carer, my experiences as a carer. Our lives together, my mum's and mine, were most definitely a journey, one which was of course unique to us, but I hope and believe that there will be elements and threads within our story which reflect many of the thoughts, feelings and experiences of other carers who find themselves on that journey signposted dementia. Of course, I can't speak for everyone. Such arrogance actually would fly in the face of everything I now believe in around recognising, respecting and valuing the individuality of people with dementia and those who care for them. However, slowly I began to realise that if others were to effectively help us and at the same time help us to help ourselves, they would certainly need to know about us as people. Why then am I sharing our experiences with you today? I don't really take any great delight in talking about me, nor do I find it cathartic or therapeutic. You might be asking yourselves, why on earth, if that really is so, would I want to tell you my story? Well, I'm hoping that you will work that out for yourselves. But this isn't my story. It belongs to me and my mum. And to be honest, it was never really intended to be shared with others outside of our family. However, I have made a very conscious decision that in telling our story, I will be as honest and open as I can. So here goes. I was one of 3 children in our family. We were very close, probably because my dad's job meant that we moved around often, leaving family and friends along the way. We were affectionate and certainly cared very much about each other, although in public, I guess, we were not seen as particularly tactile or emotional. In many ways, we were quite private, independent and self-sufficient as a family. We were survivors, I suppose. But now I'm going to take a huge leap to the time when my mum was in her late 70s. She had become more obviously dependent on me, and I knew exactly why, or so I thought at that time. My dad had died suddenly, just 4 months before his death. He'd been keen to move close to me and my family. Did he at that time have more insight into his own health and my mum's impending struggles than he shared with me? Well, I'll never know. But I grew to thank him for that move. How else would we have coped if my mum had lived many miles away? Now, for the first time in her life, my mum was living alone. It made complete sense for her to have us to help and support her. And she clearly enjoyed having her family nearby and delighted in watching my family growing up. Thirdly, we all become a bit more forgetful as we get older and deserve a little bit of extra help and reassurance. I can certainly testify to that. But fourthly, and most significantly for my family, I guess, my sister had died quite suddenly, leaving a husband and young son behind, and all of us were stunned. How terrible must that have been for an elderly mum to come to terms with? No wonder she was struggling. These four things then, inevitably, I felt explained my mum's change in personality, her self-esteem, and her ability to cope. I was glad we were around to help. We'd manage. I knew that, and it never occurred to me then that my mum might be developing dementia. In many ways, now had become my time in my own life. Our kids didn't see themselves as children anymore, and they weren't really. And for the first time in many years, I'd agreed to work full-time at my job as a primary school teacher. As a family, we had much to enjoy and be grateful for, and our lives ahead to look forward to. So why was something increasingly niggling me about my mum? What was happening to her which sometimes made me feel so uneasy, sometimes irritated, frustrated, and out of my depth? She never complained about feeling unwell. She never seemed to be ill. She looked perfectly lovely, and to everyone else in her world, especially to her GP, she gave the impression that all was well. As a teacher, I'd looked after and taught 30 children every day, and I was expected to be confident and competent, so I felt that caring for and about a kindly old lady who was also my mum shouldn't be too difficult. So maybe whatever it was that was bothering me, was saying actually more about me than it was about her. Perhaps I was not, after all, the caring daughter I'd hoped I might be as my mum grew older. One evening, I sat down to relax and watch a film on TV. To my amazement, by the end of it, I knew exactly what was wrong with my mum. The symptoms of the central character in that story of a much younger woman mirrored what I then realised was happening to her. By now, the tears were rolling down my cheeks. That was my first introduction to Alzheimer's. So, the teacher in me gave me a good talking to. I would find out all I could about dementia, and then I'd get on with it and cope. My mum's GP agreed that we had a problem, though we decided rightly or wrongly, and probably wrongly with hindsight, not to discuss it with her. How would that help her? He asked me gently, and I assured him that whatever, we would cope. If this surprises you, it shouldn't. I recently sat at the hospital bedside of someone I have cared for almost all my life, whose own family found themselves going down a similar path. Could all of those around her, including her GP, not have noticed or understood the symptoms of what was happening? Or if they did, why? At this point, my question tails off in dots across my page, and I'm certainly not about to start being critical. How or who would that help within that family now? It It doesn't take much effort on my part now to recall how muddled my own thinking was as our journey progressed, my mum's and mine. I couldn't see the need for community nurses, and I do apologise if there are any in the room today. What exactly did they do? Social workers, in my eyes then, were there to support deprived or dysfunctional families, perhaps struggling financially, and I couldn't relate to that. And to be honest, I had by now become very protective towards my mum. I knew that she didn't want others to witness her struggles, and it felt like we two were sharing her secret, and I respected her wish to keep it that way. It was many months later that I admitted to myself that we needed help, that I needed help. I hadn't a clue how we were going to accept it, especially when my mum greeted me one day with, "If I told you what I think is going on in my head, you would put me away." The tears I fought back then were for her, but I guess they were for me too. How could she ever imagine that I could or would do that to her? Her childhood generation knew all about and feared workhouses and mental asylums, as she called them, and the indescribable pain of those who were locked away from their families and the outside community. It was clear to me that she was unhappy and frightened. Me too. I had to do something. My full-time job now reverted to part-time teaching. My original determination to keep our problems within the family clearly wasn't working. So I sought help for her, and I found that with it came support for me, and my spirits lifted. I met some lovely people within health and social care who assured me that they were there to understand and help in emotional and practical ways. Kindly, they asked me what I wanted and needed. I hadn't a clue. I'd never been in this situation before. I discovered the Alzheimer's Society and was amazed at the role I let it play in my life, though thinking I was being protective towards my mum, not in hers. I'd certainly never imagined that I would be pouring my heart out to anybody, let alone to strangers. Yet here I was doing just that. I had kindly friends and colleagues, though for a long while I was very careful who I came out to. Then and still today, I know that mental ill health is not understood by everybody, and I knew that I needed empathy to help me as I tried to help my mum. I had a lovely and supportive immediate family around me, though the wider family, who were living away, found it very difficult at times to grasp really what was going on. But life still went on around us. We had much to celebrate within our family, much to enjoy still, laughter to hear, and a future ahead of us which, well, actually, we didn't think much about the future. I suppose we learned really to concentrate more on the present. All should have been well, or as well as it could be. Yet there were times then in my life when I had never felt so alone. I realised that I found myself with a new job, a job I'd never anticipated, was totally unqualified for, certainly wouldn't have applied for, and if given the chance, I would have turned it down. I had a new relationship in my life now. It was with the word guilt, and I really didn't handle that too well. I was now a carer, and I was becoming my mum's mum. Not a role I felt comfortable about at all. She needed me, I realised that, but I still needed my mum too. And though in many ways we grew closer, I missed the mother-daughter relationship that we had shared all my life. I could talk at length here about the new challenges we faced, some on behalf of my mum and some very personal to me. Perhaps you can fill in many of the gaps I'm leaving to your own experiences and imagination now. And I also know that others today will be covering many of these later on. Dementia had at times the ability to bring out the worst in me. "What more do you want me to do?" I snapped at my mum one day. knowing full well that she couldn't answer such an unfair and loaded question. What prompted that little outburst from me? Nothing more than her need just then for constant reassurance, asking the same questions over and over and over again. I can't really begin to imagine how hard it must be for a person with dementia to hang on to their individuality and the person they are when their communication skills and self-confidence begin to let them down big time. It must be really hard when they first find themselves in the care of others, whether in hospital, the wider community, or even in their own homes. That's why I passionately believe that it is so important that we all know something, if only a little, of the life and background of a person with dementia and their carer. I cannot pretend that to talk openly about themselves is necessarily an easy thing for people with dementia and their carers to do. But how else can we all begin to best understand and care for those who may be beginning not to know and understand themselves? At about this time in our lives, I began to acknowledge that however hard we tried, dementia wasn't going to stand still. New decisions were ahead, waiting to be faced. Alongside her dementia, my mum's health began to cause her real distress on a daily basis, when she developed a physical but unrelated condition to her dementia. This wasn't life-threatening, and the consultant's words took me by surprise. There's nothing else we can do to help your mum except an operation. I knew, though I'm not sure he did, that her memory of his words would disappear before we left the door of his consulting room. Before we'd entered just a few moments earlier, my mum had turned to me and said, "Remind me, Pauline, what are we doing here?" A young doctor took me on one side and gently said, "You're in an impossible position, aren't you?" She knew what was beginning to dawn on me. At this moment, I realised that without her operation, my mum would become more and more uncomfortable and distressed. I also knew that if she survived the anaesthetic at her age, her mental health and well-being would almost certainly have declined. I could have hugged that young doctor, and I'm not in the habit of hugging doctors, I should say. She couldn't have known how much it meant to me to feel that somebody else in that room had such great insight into the turmoil which was going on in my mind. Suddenly, I was facing a lonely and very difficult decision about my mum's life. It was a decision I didn't want to be responsible for. I wanted such a responsibility to belong to someone else, almost anybody else, just not to me. Before leaving the hospital that day, I had signed her consent form for her operation. On arriving home, I knew that all our lives were about to change. How I hated her dementia at that moment. I remembered her lifelong fear of hospitals, and I felt overwhelmingly sad for her then. The day of my mum's operation came and went. She survived. I was surprised at my ability now to stop worrying about her medical condition. That was now for others to be responsible for. My concerns were really for her bewildered feelings of abandonment in a place she couldn't understand and recognise. How on earth was I going to convince my mum that all of this was actually to help her if she hadn't a clue where she was or why she was there? And I fretted too about her distress, affecting very poorly people on her ward. After some weeks in hospital, my mum was ready to leave, and the next day I began my search for a residential home to care for my mum, because I knew that she would never again be able to go home and live alone. I wanted to find a care home that was for my mum, that could give her a better quality of life than I could. But it was painful for me to accept that such a place might even exist. Caring for her was supposed to have been my job, after all. I know that one great sadness for families of people with dementia is that others may only get to meet and to know the person their loved one appears to have become, not the person they were before their illness began to overwhelm their lives. My mum and I arrived at her new home, and unlike you now know, they knew nothing about our lifetime journey, and it didn't occur to me at that time to tell them. As a teacher, I had long understood the importance of objects and artefacts, photos and stories, not only as memory joggers, but as sources of pleasure in their own right. Sounds, textures, and colours, tastes and smells all contribute to the richness of all our lives. I know that's what Tom Kitt was wanting to ram home so quickly. I met him once, and it is a memory I hope I will never forget. How I wish I'd thought to put together a memory box for my mum, but I didn't, and nobody suggested to me that it might be a good idea. I've now got 4 of mine, and I'm constantly adding to them. I can't really let this moment pass without telling you about Eileen's memory box. Am I still all right for time? Eileen and her partner of 70 years allowed me into their lives at a time when her memory was failing fast. She no longer seemed to know or recognise her husband, although he knew more than anyone else about her. I doubt whether he, being a typical man, I do apologise to all the men in this room, but I doubt that he remembered or knew her love of Pear's soap. Eileen's verbal communication and understanding had long since disappeared, and he and I were amazed at what happened next when I visited about a week before her life came to an end. It was a while since I'd visited Eileen, and I hadn't realised how poorly she had become. So I'd taken along a memory box which I thought might be of interest to her. And as I opened the lid, I looked at her and felt a little bit ashamed. I felt I was intruding into a very special time in their lives. I was about to put the lid down, and I saw Eileen's eye light on something in the box. And this is what she saw. I took it out. Lisa, I'm going to ask for your help, really. I took it out and I gave it to her. And with a bit of luck, Lisa, can you turn around and show people what you're doing? Eileen did just those things. She smelled the soap, she turned it round in her hands, and then she gently, for the next 20 minutes, rubbed it against the side of her face. Thank you. Putting you on the spot like that. I cannot tell you how privileged I felt that afternoon and how moved I was to watch as a simple bar of soap clearly brought back some memories worth retrieving into Eileen's life for perhaps just a few minutes. I am now passionate about finding as many different ways as possible to help unlock the memories of people with dementia. So what can we as carers do? If I could put the clock back, I believe I might have been a bit more adventurous, but I'm very aware how easy it is to be a little wiser and perhaps more detached with hindsight. I do clearly remember trying my best to get through each day, though it didn't always feel that way for me, I'm afraid, rather than thinking about the best way to get through any particular day. How we could use that day together. Clearly, there was much which had disappeared from my mum's memory, but perhaps I struggled to make the best use of what remained. I think now that this was definitely a time in our lives when I needed help and even advice about how together we could share old memories, record treasured memories, and create new and enjoyable ones. Memories that would remind me that this time in our lives gave us opportunities which were far removed perhaps from earlier expectations, but nevertheless demonstrated that actually we did care about each other and others cared about us. It would be very wrong and insensitive of me to suggest or deny that dementia doesn't or needn't change people's lives, very often in unimaginable ways. And I long for the day when it becomes an illness which no individual or family has to even think about, let alone face. I'm rather aware that our story, our journey as I've shared it with you, may appear negative or unnecessarily miserable. I've said here really little about the good and happier times that we were able to spend together during my mum's journey through dementia. They did exist, and they've left me now with treasured memories, even though they bore little resemblance to the life we'd shared previously as mother and daughter. I had to learn to turn to others for help, advice, and perhaps most of all, understanding and empathy. I can't pretend I found that easy. I came from a family which didn't wear its heart on its sleeve, if you remember. I'd chosen a job which expected me to be capable, competent, and certainly not likely to crack under pressure. Children, if you know any, you may realise are often the first to notice when adults are struggling, and 39-year-olds in a class can very soon spot their teacher's tipping point, believe you me. My mum's journey ended when she was 87. Unknown to her, my mum's illness had a profound effect on me. I left teaching and began working for the Alzheimer's Society, but I'm so grateful to her now that we were able to spend her last years together. In many ways, she was responsible for my journey rolling on, and without our experiences to share, of course, I wouldn't be here today. It has been a real privilege for me to work alongside carers and those people that they have cared for and about. I can't claim to have easy answers about how best to care for a person with dementia, and I'm very aware how difficult it often is to come up with those. However, I do hope that our story may have given you some things to think about, perhaps some encouragement, but most importantly, to reassure you that the journey you may now be taking, if you are a carer or possibly a person with dementia, that journey you do not need to travel alone. Perhaps that really is the key to finding a road less rocky. I've almost finished, but if I've got a moment, there are just a few more things I would like to say. One aspect of caring I really struggled with was coming to terms with sharing information about my mum, which I felt was not really mine to share. I know how much I value my independence, individuality, and my right to privacy, as most people do. And I'm sure I wouldn't take too kindly to others feeling they had the automatic right to talk about me and for me, even if it was well-intentioned. Just before Christmas, I sat with my nephews at the bedside of my eldest sister. Like our mum had, she was now travelling her own journey through dementia. It ended for her on Boxing Day. A few days ago, I asked her sons if there was anything they would like me to add to what I might say here today. Here are some of their thoughts. With hindsight, they regretted there hadn't been an earlier diagnosis of their mum's dementia, but they understood and respected her fears about this and their dad's huge determination to care for her in the privacy and familiar surroundings of their home. He, quite simply, wanted to look after her and protect her. They also believe that an accurate diagnosis of dementia was masked for some time, mainly because of my sister's symptoms and history of depression. They remember that they struggled to convince their dad that it was okay and not disloyal for him to allow others into their lives and to accept help, even though their mum increasingly wanted to withdraw from the outside world. They wished their dad had been persuaded sooner to open up to others about how difficult his caring role had become, and that others had been able to see through his constant cheerful, "Oh, we're coping." He didn't seek or accept help. until his own ill health caught up with him. My two nephews, of whom I am very proud, are very wisely spending some time together as they sort through their parents' home, reviving their own happy memories of their family's life together. They realise that it is helping them now to come to terms with the end of their parents' journey through dementia. Do I know how I would feel if I began my own journey through dementia? Well, of course I don't. But I can probably claim right now that I know myself better than anybody else, even though I guess my mum claimed many times, and probably quite rightly, that she could read me like a book. I'm going to end now with an open letter I've tried to write. I've tried to write it as though through the eyes of a person with dementia, but of course the only person I can truly have the right to speak about would be me. It's addressed to anyone who may have responsibility for looking after me if dementia should enter my life. Family, friends, and professional carers. I certainly wouldn't want to suggest that this could have been a letter from my mum or my sister, but I'm sure they have both influenced some of what I have chosen to reflect on now. You may have heard about a living will. Well, I've given my letter a title. It's called A Will to Live. I hope it will reflect just a few things I have learned about people living with dementia and their carers, and quite possibly quite a lot about me as well. So, a will to live. Who are you? You know my name, but I'm not too sure I remember yours. What do I call you? How do you see me? As a loved one, a patient, a service user, a resident perhaps, or as a person with dementia? What do you really know about me? I believe you want to take care of me and keep me as safe as you can, and I'm grateful for that, but please help me to breathe. My problem is that until what seems like yesterday, keeping other people safe was my role in life, and I enjoyed how busy it kept me. Now what do I do? What is my role in life now? Did you know I used to swim and ride a bike? Do you know if I can still do those things? I used to be a teacher. Are you brave enough to give me a circle of paper and a pair of scissors and see what I can create with them? You might decide to introduce me to a patch dog. I'm not too good with dogs and may well recoil in horror. But introduce me to a guinea pig or a rabbit and you could get a very different response from me. What am I going to do today? I enjoy listening to the Beatles and John Denver, but please don't inflict the Rolling Stones on me just because we are the same generation. Did you know I used to love to hug a patchwork cushion, choose my favourite pick and mix sweets, and remember the tastes and smells of my childhood and my children's early years? How can you help me to remember my children and my grandchildren, the most precious things in my life? The things I fear forgetting most. Oh, and my husband too, of course. My childhood family may remain in my memory for longer, so I'm told, so that's good news. That reminds me, has anyone thought of referring to my maiden name recently? My guess is that would bring back many happy memories for me. Why is there so much around me which I can't relate to anymore? I want to wash my hands, but where is the bar of my favourite soap that used to sit there waiting for me? I'm sure you must still be able to buy it in the shops. You ask me so many questions, and I love the fact that you talk to me. I have questions for you too. Some I can put into words, but others seem to be trapped in my thinking. These times are probably the lowest of my day, especially with the times I can't remember the answers you have patiently, so patiently, already given me. My family may need help to understand this different me, but please don't expect them to take it all in. You will almost certainly need my family to tell you about the old me. But once you know more about us, perhaps together we can find ways of helping them to feel included still in my life and I in theirs. We may need privacy to be a couple, or long to feel included again in a social group where we can share activities and past interests and experiences. Why didn't I think to write a life story book at some time in my life? Perhaps it really isn't too late now to do that, especially if together we can find a little time searching through memory boxes, remember I've got 4 of them, and photo albums. Who knows, we may well discover that there are more of my memories left than any of us have realised. P.S. A word of advice. You may want to quietly remove the whistle from my memory box. The teacher still in me, I'm sure, would have a field day using it to arrange many unsuspecting people into an orderly line or 2 or 3. Now there's a real recipe for disaster. Thank you.